Welcome to the Brodart Tell Me More Around the World webinar. We have a really great group of authors today, 5 titles, 5 authors. 2 authors have won the Governor's General Award. We have a New York Times best-selling author, and we have 2 authors, but these are their new books. And we're so excited to have them today. Susie Hawley is our moderator, and Susie is from Brodart. She is our collection development librarian. She also was a school media specialist. She was a professor of literature. She was a co-author of a children's literature textbook. And she was also on the Newbery Committee member for the Newbery Committee Awards. We're so excited to have Susie here, and we're so excited to have our authors. So Susie, over to you.
Thanks, Elenita. We are just delighted, as Elenita said, about these 5 authors today. And with their 5 amazing books, you are going to enjoy every minute of this webinar, I guarantee you. Let's start with Bahram Rahman, who has given us a gentle story called If You See a Bluebird. Bahram grew up in Kabul, Afghanistan, and emigrated to Canada in 2012. As well as being an author, he has a medical degree. He's been an activist for gender equality, and he serves as senior policy advisor at the Ministry of Health in Ontario. Take it away, Bahram.
Well, thank you so much, Susie, for the lovely introduction. It's just wonderful to be here, and especially alongside these wonderful co-authors, I would say, and just talk about If You See a Bluebird, which is my new book. I think came out last week or this week. I honestly, the time flies by so quickly. If You See a Bluebird tells the story of Ali, an Afghan refugee boy, and his family as they are trying to find a new understanding of belonging and meaning of home. They have recently left Afghanistan and they are in their new country that they have resettled in. The story follows Ali and his grandmother, Nana. They wake up early in the morning and they go to pick blackberries. And as Ali finds the taste of blackberries and kind of unfamiliar and strange, it's not common in Afghanistan. But he remembers the sweet mulberry, which is very widely available in Afghanistan. And that memory kind of takes him home, and he misses home. And alongside, kind of making the wish that the war to stop so they can go back. He has some help from his grandmother to kind of explain to him, and then they both kind of come to this realization that what is really important in life, especially when so much has been lost. I think what I really want to like of course, like this is a sensitive story, and I know when you read this story, it will it emotionally touches. So far, I have heard everyone. But I think this is more of a story of a courage. I think it's the story of courage generally shown by refugees as they build new lives in their new countries. It's a story of hope, that how there's always that glimmer of hope that people kind of try to grasp and to survive. And of course, most importantly, it's about love. And I think love we have for our families, for our chosen, our blood, or otherwise, and the love for the memories that we have, and that's something that never changes. Yeah. So, and that is in a way the basis of how kind of I personally think we define our belonging and true meaning of home. So I wrote this. One of the reasons, honestly, I wrote this book is because I thought this kind of the internal struggles of refugees were never really talked about or reflected in the children's literature. So I really wanted to give voice to that. But also, most importantly, I wanted to provide teachers, parents, librarians, just a tool to have some of these conversations, students or their refugee children or otherwise that they met their public facilities. Of course, my stories are all based on some of my own experiences, some of my people that I have known, some of my friends, I still have family living in Afghanistan. I have friends that they just left after the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban. So I try to kind of bring in that kind of common universality of that experience. I have to admit, I was not really, I was quite hesitant to write this story. Like I thought this might not even work for children. It requires more kind of a depth and conversation and kind of unpacking. However, it was, to be honest, my publisher, Gail Winskill, that she convinced me to do it. And I'm so grateful she did that. And so we promised each other we will do this in a probably the most dignified way possible because this is too private and personal for me. This, for example, this picture, which is like in a way that breaking of the frame actually happened in our house in 1996 when the Taliban came and they just smashed the pictures and my mom's picture on the wall. So I think bringing it to the public and think to people to react and sharing it publicly I thought I wasn't very sure about it. It's putting me in a more vulnerable position, but I think with the support of like Gail, I think I was kind of convinced that this story needs to be told to everyone. I do want to make a stop quickly and talk about the illustrations. I think they are fantastic and quite beautiful. When I wrote this story, finally, I was thinking about Gabrielle Gurmard and the way she approaches stories in a kind of a soft brush and touch and the depth of colors. And yeah, I think she was the only one who could actually do this book. And I wasn't really ready for anyone else. I was told that she was busy. I said, no problem, we can wait. There's no rush. And I'm so glad she accepted it. And I think the final product is quite amazing. We had to really work and communicate on a lot of like cultural nuances, especially particularly for Afghanistan. And she has been fantastic with the library bus, which she also did for me in my first picture book. And I'm so we are both very proud of this product eventually. My ultimate hope, honestly, for this book is to bring a more nuanced narrative in understanding refugee experience and in kind of open a conversation about what truly means home and belonging when we leave so much behind and kind of like trying to create a new identity who we are in this new country, which sometimes it's not also easy to leave things behind. You have to kind of create a new being out of that. So, and I hope it really resonates with you and students, with everyone. And I'm looking forward to have a conversation about it. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you so much. Did you really, before, did you realize what the bluebird meant?
Yes.
Okay. And would you tell everyone how you chose the bluebird?
So in Afghanistan, like birds with colors, I would say, especially blue, is very rare. And it is considered to be like a gift of like God, that the closeness with the sky, I would say. So I didn't even know that it's very common in North America too. So you can make a wish about it, and it's strangely it's the same in Afghanistan. So if you see something so rare and precious, and the sight of that can grant you like a good, can bring your wish, make it true. So I knew it from day one, but we had to be very specific to find the exact color because there are all kind of variation of it that is present in Afghanistan. And the color also is, I get questions a lot about why blue. Is it coincidence with my other book, a sky blue bench? But it's just a coincidence at this point.
How did you actually start writing, especially with your background? It seems like, having a medical degree and so forth, I would never have thought that you would be writing children's books.
Me neither. I've never thought about it too. Also, like English is my second language. I grew up speaking Farsi and studied in Farsi. Uh, but I think it's the lack of like children's literature that I was looking for
I
my
see.
family members, for nieces and nephews and cousins, that convinced me to do something, because there are not many Afghan children authors. There are not many stories from Afghanistan that are actually written by Afghans and shared in this way. So one of my friend encouraged me that you see a gap, why don't you fill it? I tried, and I'm so grateful that so far it has been a wonderful journey, and I'm so grateful like that I have this platform that now share some of my experiences with everyone.
Well, we're grateful too. And now, Michelle, we're going to turn it over to you. Michelle Katarusman was born in Melbourne, Australia, and she spent many years at her father's homeland in Indonesia before she moved to Canada. She now spends her time between Toronto and Byron Bay in Australia. She calls herself a nature gazer, and you will see when you hear about this book that she's very involved in nature and conservation of it. She says also she's a dog lover and a player of chess at the lowest level. I admire anybody who can play chess at any level. Somehow she manages to do a great deal of traveling and has given us 9 stories from very, very different places in the world. Please tell us about We the Sea Turtles.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Hi, everybody. It's so lovely to be here. As Suzanne said, I'm an Australian, Indonesian, Canadian children's author, and today I'm here in Toronto and delighted to talk about my new book, We the Sea Turtles, which is a collection of short stories for middle grade readers. And each story is set on a different island around the world, and each deals with a different eco theme, such as eco-anxiety, endangered species, natural disasters. And as the title says, there are sea turtles who swim throughout the pages, who swim throughout the stories. And I chose sea turtles because I love that they are so wide ranging in the world. You know, the sort of the human constructs of borders and, you know, the way we've divided up the world obviously means nothing to them. They swim the world's oceans. So because this was a collection from stories that are set all over the world, I thought they were a great symbol for the story. And because they're also so ancient, you know, I felt that they were a great symbol also to impart a bit of turtle wisdom to all the young characters in the story at turning points of their lives. I usually write middle grade novels, so short stories is new to me, and I really enjoyed changing the art form for me. It was really fun to try something different. And they're often kind of compared to each other, but they are so different. What I found, you know, with the short story, you're able to sort of drop in and have a glimpse at a moment in the character's world. And I found that very creatively, I found that really exhilarating. I am going back to novel writing, but I really did enjoy the short stories. And I didn't sort of set out to write a collection. I was inspired by an experience I had a couple of summers ago. My family was invited to go to a cottage at a friend's island in Georgian Bay here in Ontario. And Georgian Bay is this beautiful landscape. The islands are quite rocky, so very, very different to the more lusher landscapes than I'm used to. But I really fell in love with it because you feel like you're in this windswept painting. You feel like you're immersed in this landscape. And anyway, it's a place that really inspires you to want to write. So I did write a short story set on that island, and it's called Foxbones, and it's the first story in the collection. And then I kind of just started leapfrogging my way to islands around the world that, had resonated with me because, I recognize that young children today are dealing with or seeing, witnessing on media many different, deeply impactful environmental issues, and there are so many. And this was a way that I could present some of them, some of the challenges, and sort of locate them all around the place. So that's kind of how it started. I guess there's another thing that might be worth mentioning in the collection is, where applicable, I include a land acknowledgement at the beginning of the story if it's set in a location where the Indigenous peoples no longer hold sole sovereignty of that land. We have stories from Australia and Canada and the US where that's applicable. I have stories in Malaysia, Singapore, in Europe where that isn't applicable. But so there is a little bit of an explanation at the beginning what a land acknowledgement means. I think that's it. Anyway, I'm excited for this to sort of swim out into the world, and look forward to chatting about it.
Thank you so much. And I'm really fascinated by sea turtles too. Yesterday, I mentioned when we had a little session that I live in Naples, Florida. And when we moved here, I was quite excited because I had hoped that I would be able to be among the folks who go out at 4 a.m. and find the sea turtle nests. But by the time I got here, they were not permitting just regular citizens to do that. Only rangers can. But I walk early every morning, and I see those wonderful places where you can see their feet going towards where the nests are, and always wish I could be there when the babies come out of their nests. But so glad you chose them. That was really great. And you actually made me go and get my globe and look at all of these islands that you chose. And I'm hoping that when kids read this story, they'll do the same thing and become much more aware of the world as a whole. You did a wonderful job with that. And I'm wondering, were you always somebody who was really interested in nature and understood the issues with conservation and with what was happening with our nature these days?
I think to be a nature lover, and I think we almost all of us are as children, I guess it's a time where hopefully we spend a lot more time out in nature than we do as we grow older. So to love nature, I guess, is to care about it. And it's deeply important to me. I rely, for my well-being so much on my environment around me in nature. And that's where I get really all my inspiration. So I guess it's natural to want to then be concerned and want to care for our environment. And, I think I get a lot of questions about kids and eco-anxiety, and I think it's natural, therefore, that we are concerned. But there's also a lot of positive and hopeful stories that we can talk about the environment as well. And it's also important for young readers to know that, yes, we can all be aware, we can educate ourselves, and we can make everyday choices that positively impact, but it's not our burden alone. There are organizations and governments that it's their responsibility as well. So it's really not your burden alone. And together, really what I hope, from my stories and from my other books that are sort of eco-based, is that, just to share this love of beauty of the world, and that, together we can all help it and all take care of it.
I was muted. My husband wished he could do that for years. You did a great job. Thank you so much for that, Michelle. And now
Thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome. Now we're turning to Beth Rivas. She's going to tell us about The Night of the Witch, which is a book she co-authored with Sarah Resch. Beth is a former English teacher, and as well as writing numerous sci-fi and fantasy novels, she also wrote a series of books about writing and publishing. She lives in North Carolina. She has a fabulous sense of humor. You can tell that when you look at her website. And I bet she had a great time last night because she and her family dressed up as Star Wars folks and went trick-or-treating. Now, if you want to tell us a little bit about that, great. But please tell us a lot about the Night of the Witch.
Well, my son certainly did enjoy the trick-or-treating, and we have so much candy in our house. So anybody who wants candy, like, just is pouring out of our house at this point. But I wrote Night of the Witch with my friend Sarah Rosh. And one of the things that people are usually surprised about is that Sarah and I had never met when we started working on this book. This book is the best thing that came out of the pandemic for me, because when the pandemic started, I was having to take care of my husband who was ill and my son who had just started kindergarten at that point, and it was very overwhelming. And so I started a Slack group of other authors who also had children in the school age era. And so we were basically just going to chat and complain, and as sometimes it's good to do, is just get a communal group of people and talk. And during that time, I was actually working on a different historical project, because I have had, despite the fact that I write mostly science fiction and stories that take place in the future or in fantasy worlds, I've always had a fascination with history. I have a minor in history. I was one credit away from getting my major. And the only reason I didn't major in history was because in North Carolina, that meant you had to be a coach. And I didn't want to be a coach or a PE teacher. So I was like, okay, I'm going to be English instead of history. But I've always loved history. And at the time I was working on a book about the Norman Conquest, which is not a wildly popular topic in history, even though it's really fascinating and I could talk for hours on it. And at the same time, Sarah was also working on a different historical novel set in a different time period. And we just started chatting about how much we really kind of liked witches. And we were both a little sad that the books that we were working on did not take place in a time period where witches and witch hunts and witchcraft was a historical component of the book. And at the same time, by pure chance, we found a BuzzFeed article on Trier, Germany. And Trier, Germany is where the bloodiest death of human life outside of war or plague happened in Europe. And it was a witch trial that happened in the 1590s. Hundreds of people over several years were condemned and killed during this trial. And Sarah and I were both pretty shocked that we had never heard of it before. In America, we all know the Salem witch trials. And for a lot of us, that is all we know about witch trials. And so once Sarah and I saw this article and we started chatting about it, and we realized that there was a lot more history to the way witch trials happened both in Europe and in America. And we actually can even draw a straight line from what happened in Trier, Germany, all the way to Salem. Because in Trier, which is where the bloodiest witch trials were happening, that moved over into Copenhagen. In Copenhagen, King James I of Scotland, or first of England, sixth of Scotland, King James went to Copenhagen to marry his bride. And on this voyage back home, there was a terrible storm. And having witnessed the witch trials, he blamed witches for the storm. And that's actually something that Shakespeare ended up writing about in Macbeth. So if you know the witches in Macbeth, this was the origin of how that story came to be. And so James took the witch trials to Scotland. He started them there. They went south into England and then crossed the Atlantic. And eventually that's where Salem happened. But there's a direct connection between all of these witch trials. And while Sarah and I were researching this, we also discovered that there's a connection between misogyny. And that's pretty obvious that there's a connection with misogyny, but it went a lot deeper than what we originally had known on the surface level of history. For example, during the Middle Ages or late Middle, early Renaissance era, which is when this book is set in the 1590s, women who were widows or women who were unmarried had very little ways of earning income that was legitimate and was considered legal and something that they could do and maintain their reputation. And one of the ways that women could earn income was by brewing beer. And if they were going to brew beer, they had to have hops. Hops attract mice. If you have mice, you get cats. And there was one of the symbols of witchcraft right there. Also, we think of witches of like the tall, pointy hats. And that actually came from a trend during the Middle Ages of what's called hennin hats. And they're very tall, pointy hats. Because if a woman by herself had extra beer to sell at a market, she wanted to stand out in the crowd. So she would wear a tall, pointy hat. Also, if a woman had some home goods, such as beer or bread or something like that, to sell, she would put a broomstick outside of her door to be a symbol to her neighbors that she had homemade goods to sell. So come up to the door and see what's offered for sale. And all of these symbols that we associate with evil and with witchcraft are rooted in misogyny. And it became that way even more when the monks discovered that brewing beer was very, very lucrative. And one way to drive out the women from their competition was to accuse them of witchcraft and have them slaughtered. And so all of those sort of components were whirling around in our heads, and Sarah and I started talking about it, and we really wanted to take a book that could break down some of these centuries old symbols that are really about women having power, but have been twisted to be women being evil, and rewrite that story a little bit. Sarah took on the character of Fritzi, who is a real life witch in Trier, Germany, who can do real magic, and she's a part of that sort of ancient Celtic legends and that sort of story. And I wrote the character of Otto, who is a witch hunter working with the Catholic Diocese of Trier. However, this is not that much of a spoiler as it happens in the first part of the book. Otto is actually there undercover because he's trying to tear down the Hexenjägers, the witch hunters, from the inside. So he joins the witch hunters as a part of an elaborate plot that he has come up with his sister in order to sort of take down all of the witch hunters and save the innocent people who have been accused and are going to be burned at the solstice. But of course, our real life witch comes in, messes everything up, ruins the plans, and now the real witch has to work with the witch hunter to enact this sort of rescue of the innocents that have been accused. So it was really fun to play with the enemies to lovers aspect, but also to weave in a lot of real history in it. And because Sarah took on the character of Fritzi, who does the magic, she invented the magic system and tied it to the ancient Celtic tribes and how those people worshipped and practiced their crafts. And I took on the character of Otto, who is not magic at all, but he is a lover of history. And that is something that I am also a lover of. I adore history. And I learned through writing this book that basically in Germany, if you poke the ground hard enough with a stick, you're going to come up with something Roman. There's a reason why it was called the Holy Roman Empire. There's a reason why Rome, the Roman influence was so heavy. And it's all started in the heart of Trier. In the heart of Trier, that's where Charlemagne had his seat of power, or Constantine, I'm sorry. Constantine had his seat of power in Trier, Germany. They had multiple cathedrals and a lot of Roman architecture. And we were able to build that into the story. Porta Nigra is a gate that the Romans used. It's called the Black Gate. And it still exists today. You can still visit it. And I was lucky enough to be able to go to Germany and see it and go inside of it, which was an amazing dream come true for me, because as somebody who has only ever written science fiction or fantasy worlds, to actually be able to visit the place where a book took place was awesome. But I wasn't able to visit that until after we had actually written the book, because we wrote it during the pandemic. So we had the whole book written before it was safe for anybody to travel again. And we had to use a lot of Google Street View, a lot of JSTOR and historical primary documents to sort of track where our characters would go and how they would work. But it was a fun challenge to write during the pandemic, but it was much, much better to actually be able to go there in person and see it afterwards. And there's a lot of history within that city. Not only do we have the Roman ruins, but the oldest apothecary in Germany is in Trier, and we have our characters go to that apothecary. We also were able to use some of the ancient architecture to our benefit. One of the cathedrals was a former palace of Constantine, and it had what's called a hypocast, which was a sort of indoor plumbing and heating system within an ancient building, much more advanced than actually what most of the medieval people had. But by studying the architecture of that building and knowing that it was there at the time that the book took place, we were able to actually come up with a heist that theoretically could work. So when Fritzi and Otto actually figure out how to free everybody from where they've been imprisoned in the Alla Palantina, those tunnels exist, the hypocast exist, and they use gunpowder. So if you ever need to blow up Trier, I'm not saying there's a plan there in the book, but it would work. I'm pretty sure my math is correct on that one. So we were able to bring in a lot of actual architecture and actual fun details that already exist within the history of the city into the book, which I, as a history lover, really, really, really enjoyed doing it. There were a lot of unique places that I wanted to make sure that we highlighted in the story. For example, Trier was started as a Celtic city. Then the Romans took it, and eventually it became a Germanic state. But before it had a medieval wall, there was always the risk of people coming in and stealing from the city, sieging the city, especially when merchants would come in because it's right on the river. So it was a very mercantile city. The rich people of Trier built what's called house forts. There is no door on the ground floor of a house fort. The only way to get in or out of this house fort is with a ladder coming out of the front door that's actually on what we would call the second story. There's absolutely no way in otherwise. And that was a way for the people to protect their mercantile goods and their wealth before the city wall was built. And I just thought that was so fun and fascinating that I actually ended up having that as part of a major plot point of the story. And of course, if I have a witch hunter who's going to besiege the city and free a bunch of people and perform a major heist, he's going to live in a house fort. So I was able to bring those sort of fun details about the architecture that are actually really true and really there. And if you could take this book and count the steps of how long it takes to go from the apothecary to the cathedral. And I was pretty happy that it was close to accurate, thanks to Google Street View and being able to double check on that. So it was a fun way to write the book and explore both history and culture and all these other elements to come into a story that's also hopefully fun and entertaining and romantic and magical. And the last thing I want to say is that one of the other really awesome things about doing this is that in the research of this book, both Sarah and I found relatives from our past. I found out that one of my relatives from the 1690s, so a little bit after my book was done, was actually in Trier. He had discharge papers when he was going to immigrate, and he had actually been in Trier. And so that was an amazing discovery for me. And Sarah found out that she had family who were in the Black Forest and in the Bavarian countryside. And it just ended up as a great twist of fate that the character I wrote, who was from Trier and worked in the city, I had a relative from Trier who worked in the city, and that the character Sarah wrote, who had magic and goes to the Black Forest, which was the heart of magic in her story, she also had relatives from that exact area. So it's kind of a nice way to uncover some of our own personal history along with all the history of the books.
Thanks, Beth. One thing, you kept saying freeing a lot of people. Well, it was 100 witches. And is that true? Were there 100 witches that they'd say they wanted to do the solstice? They wanted to have 100 witches to burn them on the solstice. And
so in real history, it was actually much more than 100. It was several hundred. And it extended past the city into the outskirts of the diocese. So it was actually far more people who were killed during this process over the course of many years. We focus on 1 year, but the witch trials in Trier lasted for about a decade with the archbishop and the guy who did the executioner. They performed throughout the whole diocese and killed. Some numbers are less than 1,000, some put it over 1,000, but it was actually much more over a much longer period of time. We condensed it to 100 so that we could have everybody reasonably fit in one building. And we gave it a sort of a time limit to give it a little bit more tension. But the reality was that it was many, many people, and it was happening constantly.
Wow. And Otto, thank goodness, actually knew about those tunnels. And that was how they took the witches out. They trained them.
And those tunnels are really there.
That's
and I did so much research trying to find them. I can't tell you that I started to learn German because I was trying to figure out where those tunnels actually were.
It was a fascinating story, but when I finished it, I had no idea it was a duology when I started. And when I finished and the bad guy had come to life, basically, I was like horrified. And then, thank goodness, when I was doing research on you and on the book, I realized that there's another one coming and I can't wait.
Yes, that was so much fun to write. We originally intended the bad guy to be a redeemable character, but one of the fun things about co-authoring is that I'm a very competitive person, so I constantly wanted to one-up things. And so like Sarah would like one-up and make the kisses more romantic, and I would one-up and make the bad guy more evil. And it got to the point where like, oh, he's not getting redeemed. He's just fully bad. And I take full credit for how bad that guy ended up being.
Wow. Thanks so much. It was really a fun read. Let's move on now. And we are next going to talk to Izzy. Izzy Hendricks wrote a book that has a very similar theme. I bet, Izzy, you've already realized this when you just heard Beth talk. It has a very similar theme. There's a lot of religious colonization in both books. They talk about pagan, princes and so forth and so on. But anyway, Izzy Hendricks is a Nigerian American. She's a member of the Igbo tribe, and she lives in Brooklyn, New York. She's an anthropologist, and she's worked all over the world, from the Himalayas to the Amazon rainforests. And in fact, she spent many years with shamanic tribes in the Amazon Gabonese rainforest. Interesting that she obviously used her experience in her title, Adia Calbera and the Circle of Shamans. Please tell us all about this wonderful book, Izzy.
Thank you for the introduction. This is my debut novel, and yeah, it has a lot of similarities to Beth's. And actually, I also wrote this during the pandemic. This was my book, the only good thing that came out of the pandemic for me. I was actually due back in the Amazon, and my flight got canceled. So it was like the same week. I was like, okay, you have time now. You always said you'd write that book, so let's try. And I now know that I'm what's called a pantser, like when you just write by the seat of your pants and don't have an idea of a plot. So I didn't know what I was writing until really the first draft was finished. And then I kind of went back and read it. And it's this fantasy, this middle grade fantasy that's set in an African-inspired fantasy world about 12-year-old Adia, who has a lot of traits that make her ostracized from her family and village and tribe. They call her an Obanji, which is a real thing for my tribe. The English translation is children who come and go, and which is what I actually originally called this book, but my publisher said it was too literary and not middle grade fantasy enough, so they made it this instead. So these demon children they're said to reincarnate over and over and die young, just to bring misfortune everywhere they go. So she's convinced that she is one of these like possessed demon children. So she runs away from home to find a shaman who can help her, except all the shamans have basically been purged from her world by missionaries. So it's not too much of a spoiler. The book basically begins when her world is in the aftermath of religious colonization. And so she goes on adventures and, meets African gods and demons, but really it's a story of self-love and self-acceptance. And it's her emotional journey more than anything. And yeah, definitely took a lot of real life inspiration, a lot of imagination, but a lot of real life inspiration from my tribe, because this did happen to my tribe. Like my oldest uncle is probably in his 80s, and he wouldn't know a lot of the things that I'm writing about because I had to research them, because the missionaries really did like just wipe out our culture and our beliefs and replace it with, Western religion. And so this is going on, it's real, and it's hard to write about. I always think about that Madeleine L'Engle quote, like if something is too difficult for grownups, write for children. So it's like, okay, how to write about religious colonization. And it turns out fantasy was the perfect way to do that. And it was important to me because Adia is 12 and I was 12 also when I left my family's religion. And I don't really see that a lot in books. I don't feel like that's talked about, like children who are leaving their religion or who want to and maybe can't. So even now I write under a pen name just as a safety issue, because I don't want my family to see what I'm writing about, because they are this religion that I walked away from as a very young child, which Adia does as well. And I just felt like that was something important to discuss, to believe children when they know something is wrong for them. And like my religion is very conservative, and you know, it's homophobic. It's terrible. It's so this book, it's I hope that it's relatable for everyone, that everyone can connect to it, but I did specifically write it for children who are currently being made to feel ashamed of who they are for whatever reason. And just to know that it does get better, you can get through this. And I got so much hope from fantasy books, especially as a child. Like, I'm so happy to be doing this talk with librarians, because the library was really just my safe space as a child. I read so much, but also, like, to any librarians watching, I promise that there is someone in your library, or you will have someone in your library who's just there because it's like a safe place to go, and where they know they can just be, you know, loved, and people will treat them with kindness and respect for a few hours for free. So I just, yeah, and there's a library in my school, of course, in my book, of course. I'll always have like libraries, like there'll be a theme in all of my books, because libraries were such a huge part of my childhood that just really saved me. And so I just wanted to give something back with this book, and hope that I touch those children, especially who need a book like this, because I really could have used a book like this as a kid. I read so much, but you know, it's just diversity wasn't there, especially in fantasy. Every book I read, the main character was white, usually a white male. So it was so important to me to write like a Black girl on the cover, like a Black girl having the adventures and like the heartache too, but like, you know, being the magical person in the book was like, you know, Black girl magic. You know, and it's so hard now with like book banning. Even before book banning was like just really at the head that is right now, I knew what I was writing. I knew I'm writing about religious colonization. It might not be received well, but it was so important for me to get this story out there. So yeah, it's been out for about 2 months now, and I'm still processing seeing my book in person and that I'm an actual author. It's always been a dream, but it wasn't really encouraged in my family. I'm first generation. They don't really push you towards the arts. It's more like medicine. So like me being an anthropologist, it's like I'm a hippie to my family. And like now I'm a writer, so it's even worse, but I love it. So I'm really glad that I wound up on this journey, and that I've lived the life I had that led me to have the experiences I have to be able to write a book like this. And I hope that it helps other children like me who are in positions like me that would need something like this story.
Well, I'll tell you, in the summary here on the screen, it says the snarky goddess and the knife wielding warrior. And if that doesn't pull people in, I'm telling you what, it's absolutely true about both of them. And I wondered about this. Does Adia have some special meaning? The name Adia?
It's funny. It's actually one of my favorite songs as a child. There's a song called Adia by Sarah McLachlan, but the name is actually African. It's Swahili for gift, which is not, I'm not Swahili, I'm Nigerian, but so it is an African name. But yeah, that's always been my favorite song as a child. And it very much fits the theme. If you look at the lyrics, it matches, like you've read the book, Suzanne, you would look at the lyrics of that song and be like, oh, like the chorus is basically saying over and over, we're all innocent, we're born innocent. So yeah, that's, her name means a lot to me. For those reasons.
Well, how about Ginny Kanwa? Was that the true name of some pagan goddess, or?
No, so the gods I write about are called Alusi, and they are Igbo gods, but it's like truly like my oldest relatives have no idea. Like they know who they are, but they wouldn't be able to name them. Like only a few names survived nowadays. Maybe we know maybe about 20 names, but there were hundreds. It was like a massive pantheon. There's hundreds of these gods, and it's just completely wiped out. Like even written records, you can't find it anymore because like the missionaries just like destroyed it. So Guinea, I kind of just put who I thought she would be. Like I have some who are real ones, like Ikenga, like horned Ikenga. I was actually just in the Brooklyn Museum and I saw a statue in the African exhibit of like a horned Ikenga Lucy. So like that's a real one that we know about, but Guinea's one I kind of just made up myself because so many have been lost. So her name means protector of children. That's the Igbo name means that. So I just kind of made her that character specifically. But some of them are real ones, like Mbari and Ikenga are real Alusi gods who are just lost, unfortunately.
Gosh, well, you know something, Beth might agree with, I'm sure she will, that the missionaries played a big part in her book too. Yeah, it's really interesting about reading those two books back to back. Now, Beth's book, it has a lot of ooh la la loving stuff, whereas yours is a little bit for a younger audience. But enjoyed both of them so much. And now, Satney, it is your turn. And you actually have a wonderful debut picture book. And I did not realize that we had 2 debut books on this webinar. Somehow I missed that, Izzy, about your book. But Satney has written a wonderful picture book called The Ramadan Drummer. It's going to be published in January. Now, all the other books we've talked about are already on library shelves or in bookstores. Hers is not. She's a Syrian American who grew up in the Arab Emirates, and now she makes her home in Jacksonville, Florida. She has a degree in computer science and an MBA. The authors on this webinar are not only fine authors, but they certainly are incredibly accomplished in other fields as well. So take it away, Sadhana, and tell us about the Ramadan Drummer.
Thank you, Suzanne, for your kind introduction, and thank you for having me. I want to start by saying this is my first book. I never thought I'd ever be a writer. But after becoming a mother of 2 little girls, I developed this great appreciation of how fun and whimsical holidays are here in the United States. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a fun and engaging tale to read to my girls about any of the Muslim holidays that we celebrate. And so, like any devoted mother, I decided to take matters into my own hand, and I wrote this book. The Ramadan Drummer is inspired by a very old tradition that was once passed from one generation to the next. During the month of Ramadan, Muslims will not eat or drink as long as the sun is up. And so the drummer, usually a well-respected man in the community, he would stroll the streets before sunrise, beating his drum to make sure everyone is awake for the last meal before fast. But when Adam, who is the main character of this story, hears his family reminisce about the drummer that used to wake them up when they were young, he is surprised because this tradition does not exist anymore. Now, whether through dream or reality, Adam wakes up that night to the sound of a beating drum. Curious, he follows that sound up and down the dark, winding alleys until he meets the drummer. And together they walk alongside each other, beating the drum until all the homes are lit. But as the people start waking up, whispers start drifting from the homes they pass by. Some of these whispers carry happy news, some sad. That's when the drummer reminds Adam that during this month, every act of kindness is rewarded tenfold. Now, when most people hear about Ramadan, they think of fast, but Muslims also believe that during this month, the gates to heaven are open and every act of kindness is indeed rewarded tenfold. I want to emphasize that it is so important, especially amongst all the violence that is raging around the world today, that children, all children, despite their background and their beliefs, they see themselves in fun and lighthearted stories that are filled with hope, stories that give a glimpse of the world that we hope to live in one day. And I'm beyond fortunate that I was paired with this amazing illustrator. Dinara Mertalipova is not only an incredibly talented, but she also grew up in a family that celebrated both Christian and Muslim holidays, and she was instrumental in helping deliver the message that I hoped I would through this story.
This is really a wonderful story, and you're right, the illustrations are great. For some reason, stars and the moon, are just so eye-catching always, but it was a great choice. And I wondered about that, why you actually wrote the story. So I'm delighted you told us that it was because your little girls were not finding anything and I have only seen, really, as I've seen all the Ramadan books, they've mostly been nonfiction. And
Yes.
certainly I haven't seen anything that's for the very young like this. It's a great story. I had no idea about the Ramadan Drummer. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I want to ask you something. I know that actually children are, they don't have to really, they can eat actually until they're a certain age. Is that correct?
Yeah.
What is the age? Is it about 6?
No, it's actually until they hit puberty, it's not required.
Oh, okay.
Also people who are sick, who are old, it's again not required, but there's other ways to observe Ramadan as well, which is by spreading acts of kindness throughout the month.
Okay, great. Do you remember being very hungry during Ramadan?
Yes.
I always ask Muslims that. Were you?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Wow.
It's not easy to be fasting from sunrise to sunset.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Be hard to do. Thank you so much. And thank you all. These, you've been really wonderful and you've spoken so well about your books. I expect they're all going to, except for yours, my dear, because yours isn't really published yet. But in January, we'll see it. But thank you all. And to all of those who have joined us, thank you for joining us. And this is a good time for questions if you do have questions. So let's wait a moment and see if anybody is raising their hand, okay? Do any of you have questions for each other? Okay, Elenita, I guess it's back to you.
Hey, well, thank you. All these books are wonderful. We're really excited about you writing them and reading them. They are available through GroatArt. You will get a recording of this webinar, and there'll be information about each of the books with ISBN so that you can place orders. And this was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. I just really love the creativity and all that you're sharing, and how you're giving so much of yourself. So we appreciate it. Thank you.